Two members of the Government of National Unity, but they've spoken up for the first time since the 49 white Afrikaners left South Africa yesterday to take up refugee status in the US. Now, Deputy President Paul Mashatile says that bilateral talks between President Donald Trump and President Cyril Ramaphosa are healthy and there is no sign of a genocide in South Africa. Of course, also Minister of Tourism Patricia de Lille says that tourism from America to South Africa has grown by more than 10% in recent times. And this follows comments by Trump that the South African government is waging a genocide against white Afrikaners. Now, Mashatile and de Lille, they were speaking on the sidelines of Africa's Travel Indaba in Durban. And so earlier on, we obviously got perspective from a human rights international law. And so perspective, and now we're going to continue because Professor Everisto Benyera of UNISA's Department of Political Sciences now joins us. Of course, we're looking at the shifting geopolitical dynamics and the power relations that are also underway. Prof. Everisto, it's great to finally have you with us. Good evening, and thank you for making time to chat.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having Professor Filion to lay the groundwork, especially from a legal perspective on this very complicated issue.
Absolutely. And whilst there are still more questions and answers, we're obviously getting reactions and trying to make sense of possibilities and probabilities. And this planned engagement between President Donald Trump and, President Cyril Ramaphosa, I mean, we're obviously seeing the cards that have been dealt and what's before them ahead of the engagement. How does this bode ahead of that, given what's transpired now in relation to the 49 Afrikaners that have left?
A bit of background will assist us in our endeavor to unpack this issue. The first thing that I want to point out is that we still have in our memory the ghost of the 22 Afghan refugees that were flown by the United States to take up refugee status. Their number, I think they were 22. As if to double the favor, South Africa has taken 49 refugees. So the interactions between South Africa and the United States of America on the refugee front is not new. The second issue at play here is that here at home in South Africa, what has happened has intentionally or unintentionally united South Africans more than dividing them. What we hear in the streets of South Africa is that South Africans, black and white, are united in saying that we may have problems like any other country, but there is no genocide that is happening in South Africa. There is no land that is being taken without compensation. The third observation that I want to make is that President Donald Trump has re-engineered a lot of things on the political front, and his latest re-engineering is the definition of what constitutes a refugee. We now have a group of refugees that arrive in chartered planes, not by the river carrying sacks of very little belongings, but these are pre-vetted, pre-approved refugees arriving on a chartered plane. Second from last, the impact which this precedents will have on other countries in the West, especially on how they relate to and with Africans and migrants, is going to be impacted by what President Donald Trump has done. We have already seen how the United Kingdom is already tightening and revising upwards its framework for admitting refugees and immigrants. Lastly, there are broader ideological and geopolitical contexts to be put into consideration here. Firstly is the global trend in the rise of right-wing populism, which is being fueled by such acts. This tends to emphasize identity politics, fears of displacement, and escapism towards multilateral institutions, which we have seen emanating from Trump 2.0. There is definitely some aspersions that are being cast on the traditional refugee framework. Now to your question about what President Trump and President Ramaphosa will speak about. Without seeing the brief, I think their work is already cut out, because these economic opportunity immigrants are already in the United States. I think what the two presidents will speak about is how to deal with this issue going further, because my understanding and my belief is that these 42 are just the first group of many to follow in the path to the United States.
Yeah, 49, Prof, yes. And to your point, given this shifting geopolitical landscape and, notions of multilateralism failing and perhaps a sway towards nationalism, protectionism, and the rise of right-wing populist fascist tendencies as well. I then just wonder what impact this is going to have on G20 summit, because Trump is also of the view that he will not be attending should that crisis in terms of the white genocide, as he's dubbed it, not be solved or addressed. And so how does one mitigate against this, especially when it's misinformation, disinformation? What becomes a coherent response then from our side, given that Americans are also in South Africa, there is that economic exchange as well? It's different on the ground, of course, given in relation to what he's understanding about what is happening is all about.
The resurgence of nationalism globally is something that cannot be denied. The retreat of globalization is something that can equally not be denied. However, for South Africa, this is one of their easiest foreign policy issues because there is no problem to solve. There is no genocide to stop. There is no unlawful and illegal land grabbing to stop. I do not see the G20 being impacted negatively because we know that President Trump uses these ways and means, such as the rising of tariffs, as a way of bringing his counterparts to the negotiating table. Maybe this was his way of bringing President Ramaphosa to the negotiating table. We are not sure about that. If that is the case, then maybe they may speak about the elephant in the room, which is the International Court of Justice case that South Africa brought against Israel, knowing very well that America is one of the leading allies of Israel, and that America was not happy when South Africa took that legal step. So it could be an opportunity that the two presidents will sit down and find an amicable solution. Who knows? Right now we saw President Trump negotiating with Hamas and securing the release of the last American living hostage who was held in Gaza. So we can never know what to expect with President Trump. After all, he's a deal maker.
Well, Prof, again, it's open-ended at this point, given, what's set to come in terms of that engagement and just some of the power dynamics unfolding. But I want to leave that conversation then. Thank you for weighing in as well.